I was 12 when they left me behind. Christmas Eve, 2016. The memory is seared into my brain with the kind of clarity that trauma brings. Every detail sharp and painful, like broken glass glittering in sunlight. It started earlier that afternoon. Maya had been upstairs for hours, trying on different outfits, blasting music, talking on the phone in that animated way she had when she was excited about something. I was in the living room, half watching a Christmas movie, half working on a puzzle of a winter village scene. The house smelled like the cinnamon candles my mother always lit during the holidays, a scent that now makes my stomach turn. "Sophie, have you seen my silver earrings?" Maya had yelled down the stairs. I hadn't answered. I'd learned by then that my responses were usually ignored anyway. I was the middle child in the worst possible way. Too young to be interesting, too old to be cute, and somehow always in the way of whatever Maya needed or wanted. Around 6 o'clock, my mother started rushing around with that frantic energy she got when she was trying to meet some deadline. She was loading things into the car: Maya's overnight bag, a wrapped present, a bottle of wine. My father was checking his phone, keys already in his hand. "Maya, we need to leave in 5 minutes." My mother called up the stairs. That's when I started paying attention. I walked to the entryway, watching the activity with growing confusion. "Where are you going?" I asked. My mother barely glanced at me. "Maya's party. At the Hendersons' lake house. I told you about this." She hadn't. I would have remembered. "Can I come?" "It's not that kind of party, Sophie. It's for teenagers. You'd be bored. But it's Christmas Eve." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I thought we were going to watch a movie and do presents tonight like we always do." "We'll do presents tomorrow," my father said, not looking up from his phone. "It's fine. You're old enough to stay home for a few hours." But they weren't talking like it was just a few hours. They were talking like an overnight trip. Maya's bag was packed with her toothbrush, her favorite pajamas, that new dress she'd been saving for something special. Maya came thundering down the stairs, a vision in carefully applied makeup and perfume that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked beautiful and grown up and like she belonged in a world I would never be part of. "Ready," she announced, grabbing her coat. "Wait," I said, my heart starting to pound. "How long are you going to be gone?" "We're staying overnight," Maya said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "The party goes late and the roads might be icy. Mom and Dad are staying at the hotel down the road." The room tilted slightly. "All of you. You're all staying overnight." That's when my mother finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not irritation. Not impatience. Just nothing. Like I was a piece of furniture she was trying to remember if she'd dusted. "You'll be fine, Sophie. There's leftover pizza in the fridge. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon. You're leaving me alone on Christmas Eve." My voice was rising now, panic threading through every word. "I'm 12. You can't just leave me here alone overnight. Don't be dramatic, my mother said, but there was something brittle in her voice. You're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself for one night. My father finally looked uncomfortable. Margot, maybe we should. There's no room, David. My mother's words were sharp, final. We discussed this. The hotel only had one room left, and the Hendersons specifically invited Emma and her parents. Just Emma. We only have room for Emma. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emma. My sister's name. Not mine. I was Sophie. I had always been Sophie. But in that moment, it was clear that in whatever calculation my parents had made about this trip, about this Christmas, about what mattered and who mattered, I hadn't even factored into the equation enough to get my name right. Mom, I started, but she was already out the door. Maya hesitated for just a second, her hand on the doorknob. Sorry, Soph, she mumbled, and then she was gone too. My father was the last to leave. He looked at me standing there in my ratty pajamas and mismatched socks, and something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or pity, but not enough to make him stay. Not enough to make him fight for me. We'll see you tomorrow, he said quietly. Lock the door behind us. Then he walked out, got in the car, and drove away. I stood in the doorway watching, certain they would realize their mistake. Certain they would turn around. The December air bit at my exposed skin, turning my breath into white clouds. The Christmas lights the neighbors had strung up blurred through the tears I was fighting back. I watched the taillights of our car disappear around the corner, and still I stood there, waiting. It took me 20 minutes to realize the door had locked automatically behind them when they left. I didn't have a key. I had never needed one because someone was always home. I was locked out of my own house in 30-degree weather, wearing thin pajamas, no coat, no shoes, no phone. That's when the tears finally came. Not the dramatic crying of a child throwing a tantrum, but the hollow, hopeless sobbing of a kid who was just beginning to understand how little she mattered to the people who were supposed to love her most. I don't know how long I sat there against the garage door, my body shaking with cold and grief. Long enough for the sun to fully set. Long enough for the Christmas Eve stars to come out. Long enough to understand that they weren't coming back. Not tonight. Mrs. Chen found me at 8:30, her small dog yapping as she came down her driveway to take out the trash. I'll never forget the look on her face when she saw me. Shock, then fury, then immediate, no questions asked compassion. Inside. Now, she said, wrapping her own coat around my shoulders. How long have you been out here? I couldn't answer. My teeth were chattering too hard. She practically carried me into her warm house, sat me by the fireplace, piled blankets on top of me until I stopped shaking. She made me soup and hot chocolate. She called my parents over and over, her voice getting angrier with each voicemail she left. When they finally answered the next morning, their excuse was practiced and smooth. A miscommunication. A terrible mistake. They'd thought I was staying with a friend. But I had heard my mother's voice, clear as a bell, just Emma. Not a miscommunication. A choice. 8 years later, I was 20 and hadn't spent a holiday with them since I turned 18. That departure had been quiet, unremarkable. I'd simply stopped coming home for Thanksgiving my freshman year of community college, citing work obligations that were real enough. Christmas that year, I'd volunteered at a soup kitchen. The year after, I'd picked up double shifts. My parents had protested weekly at first, the kind of protest you make when social convention requires it but your heart isn't in it. By year 3, they'd stopped asking. I'd built a life for myself in those years, piece by careful piece. A studio apartment in a converted warehouse building downtown, small enough that I could afford it on my 2 jobs but mine in a way nothing had ever been before. I worked mornings at a coffee shop near campus and evenings at an independent bookstore that smelled like old paper and possibilities. I took classes when I could afford them, slowly, steadily working toward a degree in social work. I wanted to help kids who fell through the cracks. I understood those cracks intimately. Maya had taken a different path. 4 years at Northeastern on our parents' dime, a degree in marketing, an apartment in Boston's Seaport district that probably cost more per month than I made in 3. We had each other's numbers but rarely used them. When we did communicate, it was through brief, sterile text messages on birthdays. She never acknowledged what had happened that Christmas Eve. In her version of our family history, we were simply sisters who'd drifted apart, a normal thing, nothing sinister about it. This Christmas Eve, I was closing the bookstore. My boss, Rita, had offered me the shift knowing I had nowhere else to be, and I'd taken it gratefully. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by books while the rest of the world celebrated with their families. I was restocking the fiction section when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost sent it to voicemail, probably a spam call about my car's extended warranty. But something made me answer. Sophie. The voice was male, shaking, unfamiliar in its vulnerability. It took me 3 full seconds to recognize my father. My hand tightened on the phone. What do you want? Your mother had a fall. She's in the hospital. Can you come? The request was absurd. After 8 years of minimal contact, after a childhood of benign neglect punctuated by that one night of active abandonment, he wanted me to drop everything and rush to a hospital bedside. Every bitter, angry part of me wanted to say no, to hang up, to let him feel a fraction of the helplessness I'd felt shivering on that porch. But there was something in his voice, not just fear, but a kind of desperate urgency that went beyond the immediate crisis. Like he'd been waiting for an excuse to make this call, and fate had finally given him one. Which hospital? I heard myself say. County General. Sophie, thank you. I told Rita I had a family emergency. She hugged me and told me to take all the time I needed, and I almost laughed at the irony. Family emergency. As if we were a family. As if there was any foundation of care and connection that word implied. The drive to County General took 20 minutes through streets decorated with lights and inflatable Santas. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to walk into. I'd seen my parents exactly 3 times in 2 years. Once at my community college graduation, which they'd attended with the obligatory smiles of people fulfilling a duty, and twice when I'd needed them to sign financial aid paperwork. Each interaction had been brief, polite, hollow. The hospital lobby was decorated with a sad little Christmas tree, its lights blinking in an irregular pattern that seemed vaguely ominous. I found my father in the waiting area outside the ICU. He looked up when I approached, and I was startled by how much he'd aged. His hair had gone completely gray. The lines around his eyes had deepened into crevasses. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Sophie." He stood, awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if he should hug me. He didn't try. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. How is she?" "Stable. She slipped on ice on the driveway. Hit her head. They're monitoring her for a concussion, but the scans look okay." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "Room 304. But Sophie, there's something you need to know. Before you see her. Something we should have told you years ago." My stomach dropped. In my experience, nothing good ever followed those words. "What kind of something?" He looked around the waiting room, at the other families clustered in their private crises, and seemed to decide this wasn't the place. "Come with me." We walked in silence to room 304. My father's hand shook as he reached for the door handle. Through the small window, I could see my mother lying in the hospital bed, an IV snaking into her arm, monitors beeping softly. Maya sat in a chair by the window, scrolling through her phone with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd been waiting for hours. When we entered, Maya's head snapped up. Our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen in my sister's face before: guilt, raw and unmistakable. She looked away quickly, but not before I caught the sheen of tears. My mother's eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of the door. She looked at me, and her face crumpled. Not with pain from her injuries, but with something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief. "Sophie," she whispered. "You came." "Of course she came," my father said quietly. "She's our daughter." The word sounded foreign in his mouth. Daughter. Like he was trying it out, testing its weight after years of disuse. "David." My mother's voice was sharp despite its weakness. "Tell her." We agreed. "It's time." "Mom, you should rest," Maya started, but our mother cut her off with a look. "No, no more resting. No more avoiding. No more pretending." She turned those eyes back to me, and they were filled with something terrible. "Sophie, sit down. Please." I didn't want to sit. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to protect myself from whatever bomb they were about to drop. But my legs were already moving, carrying me to the empty chair beside the bed. My father's hands were trembling as he pulled out his wallet. From one of the inner compartments, he extracted an old photograph, its edges worn soft from handling. He held it out to me with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. The little girl in the photo had my eyes, my smile, my stubborn cowlick that never wanted to lie flat. She was maybe 4 years old, wearing a yellow sundress, laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. She looked happy, loved, real. But it wasn't me. You had a sister, my father began, his voice cracking on the word. Before Maya, before you, even. Her name was Sophie too. The room seemed to tilt. I looked at the photograph again, at this ghost child wearing my name and my face, and something cold unfurled in my chest. What do you mean, before me? I'm Sophie. I've always been Sophie. My mother made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. You were named after her. We thought. God, we were so stupid. We thought it would honor her memory. We thought it would help us heal. Who was she? My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. Maya spoke up from her corner, her voice thick. She was our sister. She died when she was 4. 2 weeks before Christmas. I never knew her. I wasn't born yet. But you. She looked at me with something like pity. You were born 2 years after she died. And apparently, you look exactly like her. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture so devastating I almost couldn't breathe. All those years of being invisible. All those moments of being overlooked, forgotten, left behind. It hadn't been about me at all. It had been about a dead child I'd never known existed. Tell me everything, I said, my voice hard. Right now. All of it. My father sank into the chair across from me, the photograph still clutched in his trembling hands. He looked at it for a long moment before he could speak, like he needed to see her face to find the courage. The first Sophie was diagnosed with leukemia 3 months after her 3rd birthday. He began, his voice barely above a whisper. We did everything. Every treatment. Every trial. Every desperate measure the doctors suggested. She fought for 14 months. 14 months of hospitals and needles and pain, and she never once complained. She'd sing songs to the nurses. She'd tell us not to be sad because she was going to be okay. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. My mother had turned her face away, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She died on December 10th. 2 weeks before Christmas. We'd promised her we'd take her to see the Nutcracker that Christmas. She was so excited about it. She'd been practicing her twirls, wanted to be a ballerina when she grew up. His voice broke completely. We buried her on December 13th. It was snowing. The machines monitoring my mother's heartbeat seemed too loud in the heavy silence that followed. Maya was crying openly now, tissues balled up in her fists. Your mother had a complete breakdown, my father continued. Couldn't get out of bed for months. I wasn't much better. We were just hollowed out, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Then 2 years later, your mother got pregnant again. With you. My mother finally spoke, her voice hoarse. I thought it would save me. Save us. A new baby, a fresh start. Everyone said it would help with the grief. Give us something to live for again. She laughed bitterly. I was so stupid. So impossibly stupid. What happened? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. You were born on March 15th, my father said. Healthy, beautiful, perfect. And the moment they placed you in your mother's arms, she saw her. The first Sophie. The resemblance was uncanny even then, but as you grew, it became undeniable. Same eyes, same smile, same little expressions. By the time you were 2, you could have been her twin. I couldn't look at you, my mother whispered. Every time I tried, I saw her. Saw what I'd lost. It wasn't your fault, God, Sophie, it was never your fault, but I couldn't separate you from her in my mind. Every milestone you hit, I thought about the ones she'd never reach. Every time you laughed, I heard her laugh. Every time you said, Mama, I remember the last time she said it, in that hospital room, right before. She couldn't finish. The grief was too raw, even after all these years. We thought naming you after her would be healing, my father said. Instead, it was like we'd turned you into a living memorial. A constant reminder of everything we'd lost. And instead of dealing with our grief, instead of getting help, we just withdrew from you. Maya was born 4 years after you, my mother added, looking at my sister with something approaching warmth. She didn't look like Sophie. She had David's nose, my mother's chin. She was different, new, and I could love her without seeing a ghost. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I sat there, processing the fact that my entire childhood, every moment of feeling invisible, unwanted, wrong, had been because I'd committed the unforgivable sin of resembling a dead child. A child I'd never even known existed. That Christmas, I said, my voice shaking. When you left me, what happened? My father's face crumpled. We were in the car, heading to Maya's party. You weren't supposed to be there. It was teenagers only, that part was true. We'd arranged for you to stay with the Pattersons down the street. At least, I thought we had. Your mother was supposed to drop you off on the way. I couldn't do it, my mother said. I was already having a panic attack before we even left. The Christmas decorations, the music, the memories, it was all too much. And you were wearing this red sweater. And Sophie, our first Sophie, she had a red sweater just like it. She wore it in her last Christmas photo, the one from the year before she got sick. And when I saw you in it, I just broke. She started hyperventilating in the car, my father continued. Saying she couldn't take you, couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't keep living this lie. Maya was crying in the back seat. I was trying to calm everyone down, and I just I made the worst decision of my life. I told myself you'd be fine for a few hours, that we'd figure it out when we got back. I didn't know the door would lock. I didn't know it would be that cold. I didn't think. You didn't think about me at all, I finished. You never did. The words hung in the air, sharp and true. No one tried to deny them. After that night, my father said, we knew we'd crossed a line. We'd actually endangered you because of our inability to cope with our own grief. I wanted to tell you everything then, wanted to get us all into therapy, but your mother couldn't face it. And I was a coward. I let her avoid it. Let us all avoid it. Until 3 weeks ago, Maya said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I started seeing a therapist in October. For anxiety and depression. And when we started unpacking my childhood, all this stuff came out. About growing up in a house with a dead sister I never knew and a living sister who was treated like a ghost. About the guilt I felt getting all the attention while you got nothing. About how messed up our whole family dynamic was. She stood up, crossing to stand beside my chair. My therapist helped me see that none of this was normal. That what they did to you was abuse, even if it came from grief. And I realized I'd been complicit in it. I'd benefited from it. I'd gotten the college education, the down payment on my apartment, the parents who showed up to my events, all because I wasn't you. Maya gave us an ultimatum last week, my father said. Tell you the truth, get into family therapy, and actually deal with our grief and what we'd done to you, or she'd cut us off completely. No more Sunday dinners, no more holidays, no more pretending we were a normal, happy family. My mother reached out toward me, then let her hand drop. We were planning to call you after Christmas. To ask if we could meet, if we could explain. Then I fell, and David panicked, and here we are. I looked at the three of them. My father destroyed by guilt he'd carried for decades. My mother finally facing the grief she'd buried under layers of avoidance and cruelty. Maya trying to make amends for sins that weren't really hers. They wanted something from me. Forgiveness, maybe. Or absolution. A Christmas miracle where we all hugged and cried and became a real family. But I felt nothing. No, that wasn't quite true. I felt tired. Bone deep. Soul exhausted tired. I'm not her, I said finally, looking at the photograph still in my father's hands. I was never her. I was just Sophie, your daughter. A completely different person who deserved to be loved for who she was, not resented for who she reminded you of. I know, my mother sobbed. God, Sophie, I know. There's no excuse. No justification. I failed you in every way a mother can fail a child. I let my grief turn me into a monster. I let it poison everything. You left me on a porch in the cold, I said, and my voice was steady now, clear. You left me there for hours because looking at me hurt you too much. I was 12 years old, and you chose your pain over my safety. Over my life. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know you are. I can see that you are. But being sorry doesn't undo 20 years of damage. It doesn't give me back the childhood I should have had. It doesn't erase the feeling of standing on that porch, watching your taillights disappear, wondering what I'd done wrong to make my own parents hate me. We didn't hate you, my father protested weakly. You didn't love me either. Not really. You loved a dead child and resented the living one who had the audacity to look like her. I stood up, and they all watched me with desperate, hopeful eyes. I need time. Maybe years. Maybe forever. I don't know yet. But I need you to understand that you don't get to feel better just because you finally told the truth. You don't get absolution because it's Christmas Eve and my mother's in a hospital bed. You don't get to be forgiven just because you're finally sorry. We understand, Maya said quietly. Whatever you need, Sophie. Whatever time you need. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the sister I might have had if our parents' grief hadn't poisoned everything. Thank you for making them tell me. For standing up when I couldn't. She nodded, tears still falling. I should have done it years ago. I walked toward the door, then paused. There was one more thing I needed to say. Get therapy. All of you. Not for me, for yourselves. Deal with your grief. Deal with your guilt. Deal with whatever you need to deal with. And maybe someday, if you actually do the work, if you actually become the people you should have been all along, maybe we can try again. But not now. Not like this. I walked out of that hospital room into the bright, sterile hallway. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding, but for the first time in 8 years, maybe in my entire life, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real, solid, mine. The truth hadn't healed anything. It hadn't magically transformed our broken family into a whole one. But it had freed me from the weight of wondering why I was never enough, why I was always the one left behind. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. I was just a child who'd been caught in the crossfire of grief I had nothing to do with. I drove home through streets glittering with Christmas lights, past houses full of families who maybe had their own secrets, their own wounds, their own ghosts. When I got to my small apartment, I made myself hot chocolate, wrapped myself in my favorite blanket, and called Mrs. Chen. Sophie. Her voice was warm, delighted. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Chen. I just wanted to thank you. For that night, 8 years ago. For finding me. For saving me. There was a pause. You never have to thank me for that, honey. You never have to thank someone for doing what any decent person would do. Still, you were more family to me that night than my own family ever was. I wanted you to know that I remember. And I'm grateful. We talked for an hour, about nothing and everything. When I finally hung up, I felt lighter. Because family isn't just blood. Sometimes it's the neighbor who finds you on the coldest night of your life and decides you're worth saving. Sometimes it's the boss who lets you close the bookstore in peace. Sometimes it's the barista who knows your coffee order and asks how your classes are going. Sometimes family is what you build from scratch, piece by careful piece, with people who see you for who you actually are. And maybe someday, my blood family would earn their way back into my life. Maybe they'd do the work, face their demons, become people capable of seeing me instead of a ghost. Maybe. But tonight, on this Christmas Eve, I was enough all by myself. And that was its own kind of miracle.